So I just read Homer's Odyssey.
Homer's Odyssey. Is this about that minivan I rented once?
No, Dad, it's an epic tale from ancient Greece.
And coming off the back of reading the Iliad just before this is very much a sequel to the Iliad, or maybe even a fan fiction, if you're being unfair. It follows the character of Odysseus, who played a role in the Iliad, one of the main characters, and this sort of follows his story after the events of the war at Troy. Now, I have myself just read the Iliad right before this, and this one feels very different to me. They're both attributed to Homer, but I think the scholarly consensus, and also my feeling as well, is that these were written by different people, or at least these are different oral traditions that had finally been written down in the 6th or 7th century BC. The main differences are things like in the Iliad, every single character is named and their genealogy is mentioned. Every single person that dies is a named individual. In this one, it's much more, to me, like other stories where there are unnamed characters, Odysseus's men who get killed randomly, and we don't know who they are because they're not the main point of the story. It's all about Odysseus. Whereas the Iliad, I guess, is it's about Achilles and Hector, but we, for whatever reason, we also get the names of all of the characters, and it feels like everyone matters. Also, the Iliad is only about kings and soldiers for the most part, or at least the sort of the upper classes of the society, whereas in this book we have servants, we have, like, for example, the swineherd, who are very important characters in this. So we get sort of a broader range of class perspectives, if you can use the word class for something that's 3,000 years old. Also, this could just be me, but I did notice more references and metaphors involving iron in this one than in the Iliad. The Iliad was all about bronze, right? And it mentioned iron maybe once or twice. This one, again, all their weapons and armor are bronze, but there is references to like being hard as iron or the value of iron in this one, which, again, scholarly, I'm sure there's been scholarship done on this by very, very smart people for literally thousands of years. But for me, it feels like this one was written after, or at least written down using a later adaptation. It feels like we're not in the Iron Age, but we're in a transition zone, whereas the Iliad is firmly in the Bronze Age. So having not read this before, I sort of had the idea in my head that it's about Odysseus's travels, that he's traveling around the Mediterranean, meeting monsters and getting into all kinds of hijinks. And that's definitely a part of it, but I would say that's only about half of the novel. The other half, and to me the more interesting part and the more compelling part, is this story of revenge. So to set up the plot, we are almost 20 years after Odysseus has left Ithaca to go off to Troy with Agamemnon. So Agamemnon had sailed all around Achaea, aka Greece, looking for different people and all the kings and leaders of men and saying, hey, let's go fight a war with Troy. Alexander, the son of Priam, has taken my brother's wife, Helen, and we need to go free her. And so Odysseus was one of the men that agreed, yes, I'll get all my dudes together and we'll go off and fight this war. So 20 years later, Odysseus has not returned. And his wife, Penelope, is still waiting for him. She's lamenting that he's not home yet. There's, of course, after 20 years, a belief that he's dead. The Trojan War itself took 10 years. And so after 10 years, some of the other heroes have returned. We hear the story of Agamemnon and how he returned only to be killed by Aegisthus and his wife Clytemnestra, because it sort of feels like he was away on duty and he comes home and finds out that his girlfriend's shacked up with this other guy, basically, and the other guy then kills him. So Agamemnon, who had been the sort of the leader of the Achaeans, of the Danaans, of these Greek people, he was only the king of a smaller part, although the biggest part, but he wasn't the king of all the Greeks, but he had been the leader and the one running the show when they went to Troy. He gets killed on his way home. We hear about Menelaus, his brother, who got blown off course and spent a lot of time in Egypt and I think Phoenicia, all over the eastern Mediterranean, and many years later he finally gets back to Sparta, where he's from, or where he rules. And then he finds out that his brother Agamemnon has been killed and wants to get revenge for his brother, but he finds out that just as he's arriving, his nephew Orestes, the son of Agamemnon, has finally overthrown Aegisthus and gotten revenge for Agamemnon. Nestor, the old sort of wise character, he has gotten back home safely and is lived it up in Pylos with his sons. We find out that Achilles has been killed. They don't go into how or why. Ajax has been killed. I don't think they go into how Ajax has been killed. Ajax the Lesser is also killed at sea, and the main character, Odysseus, is also not returned. So in Ithaca, Penelope and her son Telemachus, the son of Odysseus, are eagerly waiting the return of Odysseus. So now Telemachus had been just a child, just a baby when he left, and he's now like sort of a teenager. I guess he would be like 19, 20. And in the space of the past 10 years or so, all of these so-called suitors have shown up and have kind of taken over Odysseus's palace. Ostensibly, they're there because they are propositioning Penelope to marry one of them. Because Odysseus, he's not coming back. Clearly, he's dead. We want to marry you. But they're ordering the servants around, assaulting the women, ordering all of these flocks and herds of animals to be slaughtered so that they can have perpetual banquets, and they're drinking all kinds of wine. They're basically living rent-free in the palace of Odysseus, eating all of his food, using up all of his stuff. And Telemachus, he's so young, he tries to get them to leave, but he can't just force them to leave. He can't just call the cops, because there are no cops. All these people are sort of the cream of the crop of Ithaca, and they've just taken over this palace. Penelope does this famous thing where she says, yes, I'll choose one of you to marry after I finish this shroud that I'm weaving for Laertes, Odysseus' father. And every night she undoes her weaving and starts over the next day. And this goes on for 3 years before they finally catch on and force her to finish, so she doesn't have that excuse anymore. So the whole story it's an adventure tale, but it's also very much a sort of the moral of the story is how to be a good guest and how to be a good host. So throughout this book, this song, I should say, we see various instances of people being good hosts or bad hosts, good guests and bad guests. And sort of the penultimate bad guests are these suitors who are just taken over their host's household, just making themselves a nuisance. They have taken over the palace. There are over 100 of them, by the way. So that's our setting. It starts with the gods up in Olympus being like, geez, it's been 19 years, poor Odysseus, he's not home yet. We gotta help Odysseus get home. So we're clued in immediately that Odysseus is still alive. And the gods also don't play as much of a role in this one as they do in the Iliad. In the Iliad, there's like two camps of the gods, one on the side of the Achaeans, one on the side of the Trojans, sort of at odds with each other, and Zeus kind of in the balance. In this one, it's very much Athena is like Odysseus' guardian angel. And then we do have some Poseidon who is trying to punish Odysseus for something and is fighting against Odysseus, and he's the reason that it takes Odysseus so long to get back home. But it is much sort of smaller scale in its number of characters. So Athena goes down to Telemachus, Odysseus' son, and gets him to go sail away from Ithaca and go to Pylos, speak with Nestor, and then go on to Sparta and speak with Menelaus and see if they have found out anything about what's happened to Odysseus. Some of the suitors set up a trap to try and kill Telemachus, but that never amounts to anything. And after this sort of introductory section where Telemachus goes off and we hear from the other Greeks what has happened after the Trojan War, we then go to Odysseus. So Odysseus had been sort of trapped on this island for something like 7 years by this goddess Calypso, and she wants him to marry her. She offers him immortality, and he's still refusing. He just wants to get home to his wife. And so Zeus sends a messenger, I think Hermes, down to Calypso and says, hey, look, it's been 7 years, let Odysseus go. So she relents, lets Odysseus go, and he makes a raft and sails out to sea. Of course, Poseidon's still not done with him, has him wrecked on this island of the Phaeacians, and the Phaeacians take him in and ask him who he is, tell me your tale, that sort of thing. And so then we get Odysseus recounting his story, the Odyssey. So we're jumping back and forth a lot in this one, which is quite in sort of a good way. It's not a strictly chronological narrative. We're getting all sorts of different timelines and perspectives and stuff. So Odysseus recounts to the Phaeacians his disastrous journeys all around the Mediterranean. So he had left Troy, he got blown off course. I'm not going to go through all the different places he went, but he went to like this place where people eat lotus flowers, and two of his men ate the lotus flowers and totally forgot about home and didn't want to go back home anymore. So he had to drag them back to the boat and travel on. There's of course the Cyclops, this like giant man with one eye in the middle of his head that traps them in a cave and starts eating his men. And so Odysseus and his men fashion this massive stake and stab it into the eye of the Cyclops, and the Cyclops cries out like, who are you? And Odysseus, he says, I am no man, which is, from my understanding of the Greek, it's sort of a play on his name. No man is like Odi something. It's like a shortened version of his name. And so then all the other sort of giants rush in and are like calling out to the one in the cave that's been stabbed, like, why are you screaming? What's happened? And of course the Cyclops shouts out, no man has attacked me. And they're like, oh, well, if no one's attacked you, then I guess it's fine. Must be a nightmare or whatever, and they just leave. And so that's how Odysseus, because remember, he's this super wily, super clever guy. That's why Athena like loves him, because she's all about strategy and stuff like that. So that's sort of fun play on words, is how he manages to escape the Cyclops. All of his men hide under the belly of the sheep and the goats of the Cyclops and escape back to the ship. They come to another island where I think there's cannibals. People are eating them or killing his men. He flees again. They come to the island of Circe or Kirke, and she turns all of his men into pigs. And one of them held back and was like, I'm not going to go in. I don't trust this woman. And rushed back to Odysseus and said, hey, all of our dudes are pigs. And so he, with the help of, I think it was Athena, gave him a potion that would counteract Circe's potions. And so he went in, and Kirke tried to turn him into a pig. Didn't work. And so he then attacks her, and she says, hey, why don't we sleep together, and then I'll free all your dudes. And so that happens, and they stay there for like a year. But then they find out they have to go on. They go from there to Hades. Kirke says they have to go down into Hades and talk to the Theban seer Tiresias, find out how are they going to get back home. So they go down into the underworld and speak with a whole bunch of the shades. And we get like Agamemnon and Odysseus' mother, and I think Achilles and Patroclus are even there. Anyways, they finally talk to Tiresias, and he says, you'll get home safely unless your men slaughter and eat the herd of the sun god Helios. He's like, whatever you do not kill this undying herd. So there's this herd of cattle owned by the sun god. They don't breed, they never reproduce, but they are immortal, and he loves them. So do not kill them, whatever you do. There's also this thing with the sort of this wind god who gives them the magical bag of winds, which makes me think of the SpongeBob movie, which is a weird adaptation of the Odyssey. I don't understand the whole wind bag thing, because it's a bag full of wind, and Odysseus never uses it. It doesn't do anything. And then when they're almost back to Ithaca, his men are like, I bet you that's full of gold that he's trying to hold back from us. Let's look in the bag and see what it is. And they open the bag, and it blows them way back off course, and, adds years to their journey. Finally, they get to this place where, like I said, the sun god has his herds, and they get sort of stuck there for a long time and start to starve. And they're like, I'd rather die at sea because of the wrath of the gods than starve to death here on this island. And so, in a very mosaic, not mosaic, but like Moses mosaic story, where Odysseus goes out and the gods sort of put him to sleep. He wakes up, comes back down to his men, and finds them eating these cattle. And he's like, no, this was the one thing we weren't supposed to do. How could you do this? I say it's like Moses going up to the mountain to speak with God or whatever, and then coming back down and finding the Israelites worshiping this golden calf. And he's like, no, that's what you're not supposed to do. Very similar. And so because of that, a storm starts. They head out to sea, and Zeus destroys their ship and kills all of the men, except for Odysseus, who is fated to sometime return home. And so he floats and lands up on this island with Calypso, which he has to stay there for like 9 or 7 years or something crazy. And so that's the whole story he recounts to the Phaeacians. And they're like, geez, that's awful. Hey, we'll get you a ship and send you to Ithaca. And so they do, and Poseidon then punishes them and destroys their ship and like walls off their city so that they can never escape and go back to the sea or something. But anyways, Odysseus is back in Ithaca. But he doesn't just roll up, I'm back, baby. No. This starts the very sort of cathartic final third of the novel, all about revenge. So Athena tells him, hey, go to the swineherd who works for you or your family, but don't tell anyone who you are. She sort of magically changes him so he looks like an old beggar in like ratty clothes, and he starts his scheming of how he's going to get back at all of these suitors who are eating him out of house and home, literally. And he meets with a whole bunch of his servants, but of course they don't know him, and sort of gets the vibes of who's sort of the good guys and who are the bad guys. And this swineherd and this ox herd are these two people who are really like, man, I wish Odysseus would come back, but no one else seems to really care, especially a lot of the women servants, because they see him as a beggar. All of the suitors are treating him horribly. He does reveal himself to his son Telemachus, and they sort of work together. And that's one thing this is missing, is that there's no sort of great emotional sort of moment where he meets his son for the first time in 20 years since he was a baby, or he meets his wife for the first time. And like, there's a bit, but it's not as powerful as, I guess, sort of things from Hollywood have led me to expect. So then we have the very famous scene where Penelope finally breaks down and is like, fine, I'll marry one of these guys, but I'll set up a contest so that I'll choose the best. And she gets out Odysseus's hunting bow and then sets a whole bunch of axe heads down and lines them up so the holes where the hafts go in are all lined up. She says, whoever can string this bow and fire an arrow through all of the axe holes, I'll marry that person because they're sort of worthy of Odysseus. And so all the suitors are like jockeying and go up and try to string the bow, and none of them have the strength to do it. And they think, oh, this is ridiculous. Like, no one can do this. And of course, Odysseus, in the form of the beggar, is like, I'd like to have a try. And they're like, no, we're not letting you try. And eventually he's able to get hold of the bow, and he strings it. And everyone's like, and then he picks up an arrow and manages to fire it through all of the axe holes. And then he reveals himself to be Odysseus. His son comes to his side with some armor and spears. And the swineherd and the ox herd, Eumaeus, and I forget the ox herd's name, Philo something. They lock the doors, trap everyone in, grab some spears himself, and we have a good old-fashioned melee where Athena herself gets involved and Odysseus and crew manage to slaughter all of these suitors. Penelope gets told that her husband's back and she's overjoyed, but she comes down. She still doesn't really believe that it's him, and she tests him in a way by asking one of the servants to take Odysseus' bed and move it to a different room so that this beggar can sleep in it. And Odysseus is like, what are you talking about? The bed that I created was made from like an actual trunk of a tree. You can't move it. It's rooted into the ground. And that's when Penelope's like, ha, the only one that knew that was like Odysseus and myself, so I know that you're Odysseus. And then they have their sort of reunion. And it doesn't quite end there, because you gotta realize Odysseus has just murdered the young heads of the Ithacan elite. And so the whole city is kind of going to be out to get him. They're not just going to be rejoicing that their king is back. This isn't an absolute monarchy. He can't sort of get away with this. But him and Telemachus, they then go off to Laertes, his father, who is very old and has been just like really beaten down by the fact that his son's gone. And first he tries to trick him and pretend he's not his son, and then his father's like weeping. So then he just gives in. It's like, no, it's me. I'm Odysseus. I'm back. And they have a reunion. And then the final moment, all of the angry sort of family members of the suitors come up, and Odysseus and his family are fighting against them, and they have a little bit of a battle, and then Athena jumps in and is like, guys, just stop fighting, and forms a truce, I guess, and it ends quite suddenly. And to my understanding, in the sort of the epic cycle, the full story of the Iliad and its aftermath, this story continues, but that's sort of lost to time. All we have is the Iliad and the Odyssey, but that is how it ends. So I love the revenge aspect, and this whole time you're thinking, how is Odysseus going to get back? And it's going to feel so sweet when he finally kicks these guys out of his house or just kills them. And, it did feel quite satisfying. I do wish that I'd love to see an adaptation where it's not revealed that Odysseus is alive, and we don't hear about Odysseus' story from himself recounting it to someone like the Phaeacians. I'd love to see a story where Telemachus, now that he's sort of age, it's been 19 years, he goes out and starts looking for his father. And maybe he goes to Troy and sort of retraces his father's steps by journeying and meeting all of these people who recount the tale of Odysseus. And then finally, finds him on Calypso's island or something, and then takes him back to Ithaca. And then we have that similar part where they team up to get rid of the suitors. But I'd love to the slow reveal of that, as well as sort of giving Telemachus his own sort of hero's journey, where he's going through all the things that his father has done, not expecting to find his father alive, just expecting to find out what happened to him. But anyways, that's a fan fiction for another day, I guess. So that was Homer's Odyssey.